Good morning, everybody. The Simple Handicap for Wednesday, November 27th. Thank you for making me a part of your morning. This is the NFL Week 13 preview show. I'll talk about every side, every total, every game to tell you everything I think is important for betting NFL Week number 13. It is Thanksgiving week, and this is another audio-only episode for the live stream preview. I hope to be back with video next week on next Wednesday morning. It's still just a bit of a foot issue. I tried it on Sunday night. It felt pretty bad by the end of the show. And it's just been a back and forth trying to figure out with this injury, sitting for long periods of time without my foot up. And I can't really do it in the desk and be presentable on camera. And so pardon me for one more audio-only episode. Hopefully next week get a bit of relief from the Aircast and we'll be good to go. If you're listening on YouTube this morning, I appreciate you stopping by, as do I for everybody on Apple or Spotify. I'll just ask one thing before we get going. Just keep in mind that in the YouTube video version of this, which is posted on the RAS Picks YouTube channel, in the pinned comment, anything that is added to the card between now and Sunday will be posted in the comment section. I encourage everybody to go back over the course of the week and just check in with the thread and see if anything is posted in there. I've been doing that the last couple of weeks, has got a very good response. I'm going to keep doing it as this airs Wednesday morning, and a lot can obviously change between Wednesday morning and Sunday morning for a lot of the games. So if anything is added, those will be posted in the pinned comment of the YouTube video, which will be on the RAS Picks YouTube channel. With all that said, let's get to the preview. We start off Thursday bright and early with the Chicago Bears on the road at the Detroit Lions, 9:30 a.m. Pacific, 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Lions currently a 10-point favorite with a total of 48.5. I like the Bears in this game at 10 or better. I'm expecting the Lions to run the football a lot in this game. Since the nose tackle Billings went down for the Bears in Week 9, they've just been unable to stop the run. They allowed 213 to Arizona, 144 to New England, 106 to Green Bay, and 124 to Minnesota. It's a run funnel defense. And Dan Campbell so far this week has hinted at running the football, specifically with Montgomery. He's been on the injury report, but Campbell says he's not shying away from the revenge angle. He wants Montgomery to be out there in front of his old team. It's not uncommon for Campbell and this staff to allow guys to excel in revenge game spots. So I'm really believing that there is going to be a run game effort in this spot. Now, with that said, I don't believe that that is overly conducive of covering double digits at home against a team like the Bears. I know the Lions have had big home wins against the Titans with Mason Rudolph, where, by the way, they allowed more than 400 yards. We saw another one against the Jacksonville Jags. It's a different caliber of opponent here with the Bears compared to those two teams. And if it is going to be a run-heavy game, that could perhaps be a way that the Lions are trying to coach around a bit of Goff's struggles against Eberflus and this Bears defense specifically. And I just look at this number and I think about those other two games that I just mentioned that were closing 13 and 14 against backups and injury-riddled teams at the bottom of the league. And now this Lions team, key injury on the D-line, key injury at linebacker, very likely without Carlton Davis. You have a key injury at the third level. There's some injuries here. I'm not even pointing out the issues that they have on the offensive line potentially. Decker says he might be good to go. The Lions are just a little bit banged up. It's a short week, and the Bears have fought in the last two games in the division. Their season is effectively over. An 8th loss would end it. Their playoff hopes are grim as is. But I just look at this and say, if there's any fight left in the Bears, it's going to show up in this spot. And for as good as the Lions have been against the spread, this looks like a number that's a little bit too long. Last week, the market faded. The Lions betting the Colts. I was on that as well. It obviously lost. A lot of drops. A lot of errors by the Colts. Penalties that took gains off the board that made the Lions look a little bit better than they were. And I do think there's a path here for the Bears with Williams and his legs, which have become more of an option since Thomas Brown took over against an Aaron Glenn defense that has always struggled defending mobile quarterbacks. So there's paths here for the Bears to be competitive. I think they are. I think this is a game that starts off the triple header on Thursday competitive, a little bit closer. I think the Bears show what they have left in this last game as they run the NFC North gauntlet on their schedule. In terms of props, I know everybody wants props. They've been asking in the comments specifically for the Thanksgiving games. DJ Moore, 52.5 receiving yards. I think he's the feature option for the Bears in this spot. If this is a game where Carlton Davis does in fact miss, That's going to shuffle around some guys on the back end for the Lions, potentially open up wide receiver number 1 out wide, where the Lions have struggled a little bit this season already with healthy guys in the backfield. And so that would be a guy that I would circle in this one. New York Giants on the road at the Dallas Cowboys. You have to take the Giants plus 3.5 here. That's what I did. You're putting it in your pocket, and you're waiting and seeing what goes on with the quarterback spot. If this is Drew Lock, which I believe there is a likely chance that it is, starting at quarterback, this is not going to close 3.5. This number is going to come down in favor of the Giants. I wouldn't be shocked to see it return to the 2.5, which it was priced at when this initially was posted on the look ahead, which was before DeVito was confirmed as the starter for the Giants. So I do think Locke moves this number down. I also would expect this total from 37 to move up if it is in fact a lock start for the Giants. I think that matters. I think you take the 3.5 here and you just decide what to do with it later. And in terms of the pinned comment section on the YouTube channel being useful, I'll certainly have an update for what you want to do. But I have the Giants 3.5 sitting in my account, and I'm really hoping that this is going to be a lock start. Now, I think there's some positives with that. Obviously, he's a better quarterback than DeVito. I don't need to tell you that. You understand that. But to me, there's a locker room dynamic here at play. I think back to the videos last week. I unfortunately bet the Giants with DeVito starting before I realized how ugly of a scenario that was behind the scenes. It was Locke doing his presser, and he was legitimately confused why he was not getting the start. There was the fallout with neighbors. It was an ugly situation. I think the team kind of expressed that. I don't want to say they were fully on the quit scale. They were certainly close. And so that's the fear in this game. If it's a DeVito start again, I think that's a problem for the Giants. If Locke starts, when you have a guy like Neighbors who wants the ball more and earlier in the game, Locke, even if, I don't want to call it out of spite, but I mean, he knows Neighbors wants the ball, and what a better way to get a guy like Neighbors on your side than targeting him early in the game, and you get a better passer as is. I just look at it as a positive for the Giants if Drew Lock starts in this spot against this Cowboys defense. If he does start and Dable still decides to coach around him like he tried to do in the first half with DeVito, like he tried to do with Jones in the last few games before he was cut, and really pushes the ground game with Tracy, well, the Cowboys are a pretty ideal matchup for Tracy to have success if that's the path that Dayball goes. And so I see a couple different outs here for the Giants. For me to hold this into kickoff, it needs to be Drew Lock starting. And I don't want to say it's going to be like the Niners-Packers spot last week where it took 2.5 and a close 6. It's not going to move that much, obviously. But I'm willing to take the gamble here with Giants 3.5 that Lock starts, and then we're holding that ticket, and we're in a pretty good spot. All of that to say, Dallas is still a bit banged up too. Rush is not 100%. Lamb dealing with some lingering injuries. Smith and Martin could both miss on the O-line. You just have a handful of defensive injuries too. And so it's a pretty big upgrade for the Cowboys in this game. Miami on the road at the Green Bay Packers. Late game. If you haven't heard it by now, it's going to be cold in Green Bay. We've talked about it on the podcast a few times. I believe that this is a game where Miami really relies on the ground game. It's a point that they tried to make in the offseason to avoid scenarios like what happened last season in Kansas City in the cold game where they couldn't do anything on offense. And so the Dolphins are built, in my opinion, this season to get right with that and to be able to move the ball on the ground and have success with all three running backs. And against the Packers defense, even with the improvements under Hafley, that's where you want to attack the Packers defense, is on the ground. And that could open up opportunities to where you're finding success in the defensive backfield because they're still without Jair Alexander, and they're figuring out what to do with defensive backs and how this system is going to look going forward. And so I don't believe that it is as doom and gloom as it is being made out to be for the Dolphins offense. I think it's going to exceed expectations. The question is, can they keep up with the Packers on the other side? And for Green Bay specifically, I look at this spot where they are going to, in my opinion, really ride Josh Jacobs to a big game on the ground again. The Miami Dolphins last week lost Anthony Walker. He is very doubtful to play in this game. Far and away the best run defender on the Miami Dolphins defense, is graded out really high in PFF. He left the game against the Pats, and Miami was in such a comfortable spot that New England was never able to test what this defense looks like without him. The way that Matt LaFleur is scheming up the run game if you think about the conditions and how it might slow down the game a little bit and how effective the Packers' ground game has been, that to me is an area that they can really lean on Jacobs. He's at 16 and a half attempts. I think he exceeds that mark, especially if Walker is officially ruled out. I think the Packers have a ton of success on the ground, and that is an angle that I would look at playing in this game. I don't have an opinion on the side. I don't have an opinion on the total that was good enough to bet, but I would look at that Jacobs spot in this game. There was a comment that says I say spot a lot on the YouTube comments. I'm going to do my best the rest of the show not to say it more than 3 or 4 more times. You guys can call me out. You can flag it when it happens. Forgot to mention the prop in the Giants game. I was doing the TikTok live on Tuesday morning, having a coffee. Somebody posted in the channel that Malik Neighbors was available at over under 10 and a half receiving yards in the first quarter. First quarter props are widely available at FanDuel and DraftKings and a lot of major apps. It tends to be available a little bit closer to kickoff, and so if you're opening your app this morning and you don't see it, take a look a little bit later. Malik Neighbors and the squeaky wheel narrative that surrounds him was all about him being involved earlier in games. And if this is lock starting, I almost guarantee they're trying to get him targets early. Even if it's DeVito, to me, there's still an emphasis from Daboll and the Giants to get him the ball earlier in the game. I would fully attack that first quarter receiving yard line, but you might have to wait a little bit for that to come up. The TikTok live chat went a little bit off the rails when that was pulled up because I couldn't believe the number was that low considering the circumstance. So keep an eye on that one. It's tough to say that that would be like a play associated to the podcast that is not widely available. But you guys wanted props. That's the best I got for you in this game. Las Vegas on the road at Kansas City, Friday football. I kind of seem like I'm on an island here with Kansas City minus 12, which is a bet that I like. I don't get it. I'm struggling to understand this one. This was 12.5 with Minshew last week. Minshew is out for the season. The Raiders are bringing back Aiden O'Connell from IR to start this week. That is the plan as I record. Aiden O'Connell is coming off a throwing arm injury that severely impacts his grip strength of the football. It would be one thing if this was a game played in Las Vegas and there was a full week of practice and a full week to get ready for him to come back from that injury the week he was activated to return from IR. Considering that this is a short week game with severely impacted prep, and O'Connell has to play outdoors in freezing temperatures at Arrowhead against this Chiefs pass rush. How is this a negative? Like, I don't understand why this number has tipped back and moved in favor of the Raiders. I don't buy it at all. I think this is a big negative for the Raiders. And so I'm not sure if I'm completely missing something. The clear counterpoint to this is that the Chiefs haven't won and covered by more than a touchdown all season. They're 0-4. I get it. What are the Raiders doing to move the football? If O'Connell is not 100%, we know he's not mobile. He's not going to scramble. He's going to be sitting in the pocket. That's a lot of trust in a quarterback with a grip strength issue to get everything right in cold weather on the road at Arrowhead on a short week. We know the Raiders can't run the football. They have multiple running backs banged up. Even when they're healthy, they can't run it. And nobody runs it well against Kansas City. So it's going to have to be a game where the Raiders win through the air. I don't see that as being possible. I think the chances of that happening and me being wrong are severely hindered by the injury to his forearm. So that to me is a big negative, that this line is not moving in the direction of Ward's, which scares me a little bit. But boy, I don't know. It's surprising to me. I don't know what the defensive expectation is for the Raiders in this spot as well. Have to wait and see the injury status of Hobbs and Bennett. There's a chance that they both miss on the short week coming back from injury. They just allowed Bo Nix to have his best game of the entire season. The Chiefs get Pacheco back. I don't believe there's a worry about the Chiefs taking their foot off the gas considering the recent history between these two teams and the continued revenge factor for what the Raiders did on Christmas Day in this stadium a year ago. So that if this is a 2-score lead late and the spread is in doubt, I don't think the Chiefs are pulling off the gas on either side of the football. I don't know. This surprises me to see this coming back the other way. I don't buy it. I like the Chiefs in this game. Tennessee on the road at the Washington Commanders. We released this at 43. It is now 44.5. I like the total enough to where I can say even at 44.5 on the other side of things, this to me looks like a great bet. I'm surprised that this was not bet earlier in the market. We were able to release this pretty comfortably slightly later than usual on Monday morning, and I really like it. Will Levis to me is a great quarterback for overs. He's as boom or bust as it gets right now in the league in this current state of the Titans offense. And his aggression is just such a stark contrast from what we were seeing with Mason Rudolph. But here's the key to me in this game. Think about who Will Levis has faced since he returned. The Chargers defense, we'll talk about that in a second. It's 6th overall in EPA per play. We'll talk about that in a second. Maybe a little bit phony. Okay. But the last 2 weeks, Vikings and Texans. 2 very aggressive pass rushes, 2 very good pass rushes, and 2 great defensive coordinators. Those are not easy matchups at all for this Titans offensive line, which has a lot of issues, or Levis in the pocket, who's quite sensitive to pressure. He was hit 8 times last week in the pocket where he was sacked. 7 of them in the first half. Still had a great game. And so it hasn't impacted him in a very negative way. And even in those games against very difficult defenses, there were hidden points in each. And it's now a total step back in class facing this Commanders defense. Even if Marshawn Lattimore is able to suit up for his first time for the Commanders, this to me is the best version of the Callahan-Levis offense that we will see since he returned. On the other side, the Commanders are still in control of the 7 seed, but you have to feel like desperation is setting in with this team. They've lost 3 in a row, and the offensives fell off. Everywhere on social media, film guys, analytics, it's the cliff that is being dubbed by Bill Barnwell. I mean, everybody's calling for the end and the demise of this Commanders offense. Could this be a repeat scenario for Kingsbury? Absolutely. But also, could this be, in a similar manner to the Titans, a scenario where the Washington Commanders have played really tough defenses the last couple of weeks? Last week, maybe a bit of a reprieve, but it's hard not to look at the Eagles and the Steelers, the 2 games prior to where they played. Against the Cowboys, they still put up more than 400 yards of offense. Didn't look pretty on the scoreboard, and obviously they lost the game. But the 2 weeks prior, they're playing 2 of the best defenses that are widely accepted as being so across the league in very difficult matchups for a spot, especially with Daniels potentially still injured in that Pittsburgh game. And so if you look at these 2 teams, 5 of the last 6 games for them combined have been against top 6 defenses in the NFL. So, I mean, it's been brutal for both teams, and now they get each other. What I like about the Washington matchup is if there is some desperation and we see them really forced to push in order to keep in that 7 spot, and you see teams open up. It happens every year around this time of the year, right around teams that are on the brink. You get those different styles of play late in games, and to an extent we saw it against the Cowboys. But when the Commanders need to push and they need to throw the football, that's the more effective version of the offense. Nobody has a lot of success running on Tennessee. If you want to beat Tennessee, you have to throw. It's a pass funnel defense. And so not only do I think Washington is forced into that by the Titans offense having success, I think the Commanders are forced into that because both of their backs are dinged up and dealing with injuries. I don't think Eckler will play. I do think Robinson is going to be out there. This, to me, is a spot where Washington's going to be forced into throwing, and that's the better version of the Commanders' offense that we get. So I don't think this should be a below-average league total, which is why I still could advocate for it at 44.5, but we released 43. And keep that in mind as you're looking at this and potentially betting it. LA Chargers on the road at the Atlanta Falcons. Falcons currently a 2.5-point underdog at home across the board as the Chargers continue to get bet. I like this game over 47.5. I elected not to do much with the side. It was very close potentially to being a release. It didn't get out. Similar to that total on Thursday, just wasn't enough there. Personal take of mine is that I like the over in this game. I talked about the Chargers defense a minute ago. Whether or not it's phony, we'll see. But certainly going into the game against Baltimore, they faced the easiest opposing schedule of running backs, and then Henry explodes. The first time they had to step up in class, that defense looked a lot worse than they are. It's hard not to ignore a similar run of easy quarterbacks that this defense has been able to face. Levis, Winston, Rattler, Nix, Fields, Young, Minshew. Even when they faced Burrow, there were some issues with the Bengals offense, but Cincinnati was able to move the football easily in the second half. When they faced Mahomes, Rashee Rice was injured first drive, and the Chiefs offense was going through turmoil. Some hidden points in that one with the end zone interception. The Chiefs still had 340 yards of offense. Lamar, when there was urgency forced upon him, we saw how easy some of those completions came. And Lamar missed some pretty easy throws that were wide open too. I don't want to put the Falcons offense in that upper echelon, in that upper tier of offenses in the league, but they are coming out of the bye, and there's some positives. Number one, everything said by staffers so far has been about having more play action in the offense. More play action in the offense is only going to open things up and help Kirk Cousins. He desperately needs it. He's very good when he has play action. And the effective ground game that the Falcons have between Bijan and Algier, combined with play action, is just a logical conclusion that a play caller should be able to get to. And so if the Chargers' run defense is phony, this is a tough matchup. If there's more play action involved, that's a positive for the Falcons' offense overall. And their offensive line gets a little bit healthier coming out of the bye. So there's positives here for the Falcons' offense that I think can move the football. On the flip side, the Chargers' offense, I have very little concerns about. If the injury to J.K. Dobbins forces them to continue ticking up the pass rate over expectation, well, that's good for an over. But in this matchup specifically, the Atlanta Falcons have no pass rush. We've talked about it all season. It's as bad of a pass rush as there is in the NFL. The only way that they are going to be able to have a chance of getting pressure on Justin Herbert is by manufacturing it. The Falcons right now blitz at the 16th highest rate in the NFL. Even blitzing that often, they're still not able to generate pressure. So if they decide to blitz more, I don't think that's a positive. I think that leaves opportunities for Herbert to have success throwing down the field. The Falcons DBs, this is what makes this difficult to judge and gauge. Really good name talent, a really good talent on the depth chart when you're looking at it. But it doesn't matter how good of a defensive back you are. When you're forced to cover for 6, 7, 8 seconds, you're not going to survive. And this Falcons pass rush cannot get home. And the way that Herbert's navigating the pocket is just at an elite level. And so I think this game is wide open for both teams. I like the over in this spot. Pittsburgh on the road at Cincinnati. One of a handful of games I just really don't have a lot of an opinion on. And with this being a bit earlier of a publish than not, this will sit in a handful of games that there could be an update later in the week on. A really good YouTube comment that I saw last week was from somebody who said, look, a lot of us here, we don't bet enough to justify the service, but we value the daily podcast. We value hearing your thoughts on every game because we're playing in our pools or because we're making our bets, and we're doing this, not, I don't want to say for entertainment, but doing it as a serious hobby that isn't at the top tier of a bettor who can afford the service and is betting a lot. And so there's thoughts on every game that are deemed valuable, which is why the viewership of the show is so large and continues to grow, and why I appreciate it so much. But it was a bit of an eye-opening and a reminder of a comment that even when there's not a bet on a game, something that I might see or something I might be able to say could be valuable for you guys listening. And so in this game specifically, my big takeaway is that the Steelers are a phony football team, specifically on offense. They are living and dying on third down and explosive plays. And as bad as the Bengals defense has been, to me, when the Steelers are going up against weaker competition for opposing defenses with the variance that they naturally have on offense, that's just an area where an opposing defense that's weaker could have a lot of luck go their way in a game. And you could see spikes down the stretch for Pittsburgh as they go into a difficult run of their schedule where they just don't have it on a weekly basis at times, and the offense looks much worse because of how dependent they are on these third downs and these explosive plays. And so from that perspective, I think the Bengals defense has a chance to show better. I look at the Bengals offense in this matchup, and this is do or die for them. They need this to keep the season alive. The proverbial back is fully up against the wall. There's been pro support for the Bengals so far, all the way up to 3. At 3, there was Steelers money that came back. That's natural for anybody grabbing the number, but this total is high for a reason, and that reason is because no matter what, you're getting the Bengals going down throwing in this spot. And if you're backing the Bengals at home with the season on the line, that's kind of what you want out of it too. So that's my quick thought on this one. Indianapolis on the road at the New England Patriots. Colts for 2-point favorites, now out to 3. Total from 41 up to 42. Another game I don't have a lot on. Indy last week, a lot of drops, a lot of penalties, a lot of missed opportunities. Against the Pats defense, things should come a little bit easier. We saw the Dolphins really put this defense and this secondary in a complete bind numerous times, moving the football down the field. Would think that the Colts, with their run game, which I just don't understand why they continue to get off of the run game, should be able to move the football. When we're talking about opposing strength of schedule and some defenses faced, for the Colts, it's actually been pretty damning. Tennessee, Miami, Houston, Minnesota, Buffalo, Detroit. It's the run of recent games that they have faced. You think about some of the rankings of these defense, how good Buffalo is, how good Minnesota is, how good Houston is, how good Tennessee is against the run, how good Detroit is overall. Pretty tough schedule of opposing defenses. A step down certainly here against the Pats. Now, New England with Drake May continues to play much more like an over than they do an under. Whether that continues against these cover 3 looks that Indy throws on the field and how often Indy is showing that they can win now with their D-line healthy, only rushing 4, could be a bit of a different test for Drake May in terms of what he has faced the last couple of weeks. Faced the Miami defense last week that played a ton of man. Against the Rams where he looked successful. The same thing with the Bears to some extent. Those are 2 teams that tend to favor more zone coverage than man, and May had success against both of those teams. So maybe this is a bit of a reprieve for May. Initially, when he took over, he was a lot better against man. I think there was some noise in some of those splits, and so can they find easy completions here on offense? It's certainly possible. The over has ticked up a little bit. I just haven't got there. Don't have a lot more on this game. Houston on the road at Jacksonville. It fits the same criteria. This is very much dependent on what we're going to see from Trevor Lawrence's status. If you listened to the podcast earlier in the week, you probably have 5.5 or 6 in your account on Jacksonville at 4.5 currently. Wouldn't be running to back the Jags. I do think if Lawrence starts, this ticks down a little bit further. You probably see it settle around 4. Maybe you see it 3.5 because the market just doesn't buy into Houston. In the buy, Doug Peterson said he made several changes. He just won't tell anybody what they are. And so we don't know what we're getting or what could be different other than obviously a much better quarterback starting than Mac Jones. And so that could bring this number in a little bit further. If you're sitting on those Jags tickets, again, another spot where, there we go again, another spot where you can decide what to do with it a little bit later and whether or not you want to play back. Arizona on the road at the Minnesota Vikings. Vikings from 3 out to as high as 4 and back to 3.5. I like Arizona plus 3.5. I think the Cardinals have a chance to pull the upset on the road in Minnesota. Sunday night, I talked about the ode to Dave Malinsky with this handicapping angle. He always loved to look at these spots where you had the team on an extended road trip coming back home and the impact that that would have on their change of prep, their change of philosophy. And you think about the Vikings, they certainly fit that bill. 3 straight road games, now returning home. They don't leave home until Christmas. It is a Thanksgiving week that they return home to. A big difference prepping and preparing on the road amid this win streak to all of a sudden returning home and being at home and dealing with everything that comes with that. I'm not trying to say it's a negative. I'm just saying it's a different state of mind. And Dave was always wise to point that out because it tends to be viewed as a positive. Hey, here's the team back at home. It's a spot where the team is getting up. Everything's bought in to a higher level. The road trip is in the past. He tends to believe that that is not the case. And I always thought that a lot of those angles that he posed were quite wise. And whether this is going to be viewed as me being old and aging and still buying into something that, when you look math-wise, hasn't necessarily been proven over time. I don't know. Call me stubborn. I think there's something real to that. I also think there's something real to this Vikings team just being at a ceiling and being slightly overrated. I mean, they beat Mac Jones and the Jags in that game on the road 12-7. They beat Will Levis and the Titans on that game on the road 23-13. They barely hung on to beat the Bears 30-27 in overtime after almost blowing that lead in the fourth quarter. Darnold looked great last week against Chicago. Against Tennessee and Jacksonville, you kind of see the ceiling that exists in this offense. Arizona certainly is all in every game down the stretch with playoff hopes on the line every week. Something that's been very evident is when you play Minnesota and you can navigate the pressure that is thrown at you, there's opportunities for success for the offense through the run game as well as over the middle. And I think about some of these QBs. Mac Jones, anything but mobile. Will Levis, anything but mobile. Joe Flacco, anything but mobile. Like, this defense has had a pretty favorable run of non-mobile quarterbacks. Even Matthew Stafford, not mobile. Jared Goff, not mobile. Aaron Rodgers, certainly not mobile. I mean, it's been pretty fortunate for them to just be able to rush everybody and not have to worry about losing contain and be tested about a mobile quarterback. Last week, we saw Caleb Williams have a little bit of success running, but this is a spot where Kyler Murray's legs are going to be a big asset, in my opinion, in this spot, extending plays, getting out of trouble, and that heavier personnel that Arizona can operate out of can give this Vikings front some trouble as well. And so Arizona getting 3.5. It's an on-field matchup that I like. It's I don't want to call it an all-in spot. Like, they are. Playoff hopes are on the line. You're getting max effort out of Arizona. And if the Vikings, a little bit disrupted by the change in prep this week, that's probably a slight edge that you can add on to this too. So for me, Arizona plus 3.5. Pretty good number to take in this game. Seattle on the road at the New York Jets. Everybody may have seen the write-ups that were posted in the pinned comment on the YouTube video last week for Seattle Pick'em on the look ahead. That's effectively dead now with that upside. You're looking at Seattle -2. I would advise, if you did take the Seahawks at Pick'em or on the money line at -105 or even money, take the Jets and set up for a middle on 1 or 2. You're obviously down to a very low probability, but the upside that came from that bet initially is no longer there. Rodgers is going to play. The chance of him being shut down was always low, but it was out there, and it's the Jets media, so you never quite know what you're getting or what you're looking at. There is a lot of noise going on behind the scenes in the Jets locker room. The McAfee interview with Rodgers was pretty grim. I don't know what to make of everything going on. It's hard to decipher. It's just mind-numbing to try figure out and have any sort of hope against, and it's becoming a little bit difficult to bet into. But I say that because looking at 2 here, I do think that this gets bet back towards Pick'em. If you don't have that initial position and you're just looking at this game fresh, I really wouldn't play either side in this one. I wouldn't play the total either. I heard from another pro that he was intrigued by the Jets but hasn't done anything with it. It's just a game to stay away. In terms of the matchup, the Seahawks' defensive improvement is very real. New York is going to have to beat them through the air. I don't believe that the Jets are going to have much success running the football. San Francisco did not. Arizona did not. Does this become a big tight end game for the Jets? Possibly, but it's such a difference from what Seattle has played the last 2 weeks. This just seems tough for the Jets. On the other side for the ball, Seattle could very well fall into the trap of wanting to run a lot. It's something that Grubb kind of tinkers with every week. If that's the case, it's really going to tighten up the game, really reduce the number of possessions, and that brings with it chances that things could go wrong if that run game is not working. The Seahawks are a much better offense when they're throwing the football. My worry is that maybe they tighten up a little bit with everything at stake in the play calling, and you don't get that wide open passing attack, which could work against this Jets defense because the secondary for the Jets has looked a lot worse than advertised, and they obviously have not been able to stop the run all season very well. They haven't given up big explosive plays, but they have not been able to get a lot of push up front. So some noise in that too. It's just a stay away game. Tampa Bay on the road at the Carolina Panthers. Tampa Bay a 5.5-point favorite with a total of 46.5. Give me the Buccaneers at 5.5. I cave. I'll do it. I'm in. I saw some prior numbers to this last week, what numbers were being made, where this should have been, what we were looking at. It's obviously an adjustment down in favor of Carolina. I get they have the game at home against Kansas City where it was the full buy-in, defending champs. I don't want to say it was their Super Bowl, but that was a big effort game from the Panthers. They now have another home game against the Bucs in the division. Is Bryce Young and this offensive line and this offensive staff going to be able to replicate what they did against the Chiefs? I don't think that is going to be the case. The Bucs pass rush, as we saw against DeVito, and a Giants team that kind of exists in that same weight class as the Panthers, they just walked all over them, and it was dominant. And in this spot with Todd Bowles and how he excels against younger QBs, and the way that the Bucs team is trending a little bit, to me, this is a spot where the Panthers come back down to earth after that effort against Kansas City, and we see the Buccaneers defense command and control this game. On the flip side for the Panthers, suffered another key defensive injury. It's been a unit that's been impacted by injuries all season long. Another week for Evans to get healthier for the Bucs. I'll lay the number here at 5.5 with Tampa Bay. Just seems like a game where the Panthers come back down to earth. LA Rams on the road at the New Orleans Saints. Rams 3-point favorites across the board at even money. You can find 2.5 minus 18 at DK, 2.5 minus 20 at ESPN Bet, as well as Caesars. Any of the three even monies with such a high total, you're probably finding 2.5 at minus 122, 123. So if you want to go that route, you can. I like the Rams here, and I'll say 3 even money for the sake of the podcast. The Saints' 2 wins since Rizzi took over are completely phony. Against the Cleveland Browns, they benefited from Taysom Hill breaking off big runs, but that was a game where still, looking at the box score, 35-14, nothing about that game said 35 to 14 point win for the Saints. The Browns did not turn the ball over. Cleveland was +2 in turnover margins. Cleveland put up 443 yards of offense and 380 yards of passing offense. If you're starting a game and you have a bet right now on any game blind, and I tell you, hey, here was the results from your team in that game. They finished +3 for first downs. They had 440 yards of total offense. They threw for 380 yards, and they were +2 in turnover margin. If I told you that right now, you're thinking you won and covered a big number. The Saints won 35-14. I mean, that was as phony as a box score as it gets. And the crazy part was the debut for Rizzi the week prior against the Falcons may have been even more phony. The Falcons had 11 more first downs than the Saints. The Falcons put up 470 yards of offense, 6.5 yards per play. Again, it's bizarre how the Saints have won these last 2 weeks. And now they face a Rams team, which I would rank higher than the Falcons and certainly higher than the Browns. And the number that is being laid here is just a field goal. And so I don't buy into it. I think the Rams are going to absolutely get a very favorable game plan running the football on the ground. The dual blocking scheme is fully in play. You have wide receivers with plus matchups on each side. Matthew Stafford will be comfortable in the pocket. A lot of pros here for the Rams on offense. And defensively, to an extent, I would say that the Rams are stepping back into their weight class. There's been some film expert talk about the improvement on defense and how much better they have looked against the Eagles. That just wasn't a fair matchup. The Eagles bullied them up front. Saints are not going to do that. That's not who the Saints are. And that offensive line for the Saints has been an issue all season long. And so coming back down to earth, this looks like a matchup where the Rams are more inclined to have the success defensively than they were against the Eagles. And if there is truth to that Rams defensive improvement, especially up front, has a much better chance of showing through here than it did last week. Philadelphia on the road at the Baltimore Ravens. Ravens laying 3 across the board with a total of 50.5. It's Lamar against an NFC opponent, and by virtue of that, you have to back the Ravens here minus 3 points. This is a point spread that can continue to climb up just a little bit further, perhaps touches 3.5 by the end of the week, or at some point, we'll see. Like the Ravens here in this matchup. The Eagles, as I mentioned, have just been dominating opponents up front. That's been the calling card of their whole season. They have been playing from in front. They have been front running. Things have been incredibly comfortable for them all season. But this is a completely different challenge. The Ravens, one of the best run-stopping defenses in the entire NFL. This is a much different caliber of run-stop defense than the Rams or the Commanders or the Cowboys or the Jags and their zone coverage or the Bengals and their defensive line injuries and trouble against the run, or the Giants with injuries. I mean, the run the Eagles have had schedule-wise has been incredibly favorable. But even in this win streak that goes 7 games, front running against the Browns and Deshaun Watson in that game, front running against the Giants and Daniel Jones, who is no longer with the team, eventually front running against the Bengals, who were down their number 2 wide receivers, front running against the Jags in that spot by a big margin in what looked like a game where you had a bit of quit from the Jags, front running against the Cowboys and Cooper Rush starting, front running against the Commanders and an injured Jaden Daniels. The only impressive win that I would say, like caliber of opponent, no issues, no problems during this run, you could say Cincinnati to an extent. I would say it was against the Rams, 37-20. Comparatively, the Rams to this Ravens defense, it's night and day in terms of strength and personnel. And to me, this is a game where the Eagles finally have to play from behind. And we're going to see what this offense looks like. If you're going to be playing from behind on the road out of conference, spot you do not want to be doing it in is on the road at Baltimore, especially against this defense. And if there is the deficiencies and underlying issues with this coaching staff, specifically Nick Sirianni, in terms of a coaching matchup against Harbaugh and this Ravens staff, that's a negative too. And so I like the Ravens here laying a field goal at home. San Francisco on the road at the Buffalo Bills. Bills are 7-point favorites. This game is entirely dependent on the injury status of the 49ers. Can't do much with it now at the moment. It's certainly being priced at the moment like Brock Purdy is less likely to play than he is likely to play. That's really the only way that I'm getting all the way out to 7. I do think there are flaws with this 49ers team, but that is certainly true if this team is as riddled with injuries as they currently are at the moment. And so I can fully get to and justify 7 if this is Brandon Allen playing with a broken finger on the road in freezing temperatures with the chance of snow behind an offensive line where Pooney, Banks, and Williams are all banged up, and a defense that has Bosa banged up, that still has Ward coming back from personal issues, that had Lenore leave the game last week. Like, I get all of that, and I could get to that number. I don't have a good feeling for how these injuries are going to fall over the course of the week. If Purdy is in, 7 does feel a little bit rich. If he is out, this is probably going to move a little bit more, as that scenario for Allen in the cold outdoors is tough. So this is a game where I'm on the sidelines for now, don't have much of an opinion. Monday Night Football to wrap up the week. Not an opinion for me, but a lot that I can talk about in this game. The point spread is 5.5 for the Broncos. The total is 42.5. Here's my struggle with this game. I want to back the Cleveland Browns just by virtue of the spot. The Browns have what seems like a bit of a new lease on life with Watson on the shelf. The coaching staff again this week was given the vote of confidence and the endorsement that they are going to return next season. Think about all the other teams that are in a similar standing position to the Cleveland Browns. You have a handful of teams where coaching staff is uncertain whether or not they have a job or not. Quarterback position is uncertain whether or not they have a starter. Are they trying to tank for better draft position? Are they trying to show something at the end of the year? The Browns have certainty with their coaching staff. You have a team playing inspired around Jameis Winston. And you have a lot of really good pieces on the roster. What I have a hard time figuring out is this a buy-in spot on the road? Or is this a repeat of what we saw and we just talked about with that game on the road at the Saints, where the defense is completely checked out? And I don't know how to grade it, because the game against Thursday, where I like Cleveland and wrote about it in the pinned comment section, I'm going to keep mentioning it till everybody frequents it on the YouTube video. The big reason behind that was division game. You're getting buy-in from the Browns. The weather is bad, but it sets up well for them. And we saw them play hard all game for the coaching staff and for the team. And that rivalry meant a lot. How much of that rivalry was what drove the Browns' performance? In the first game 2 weeks prior, when Winston came back, that was the new QB bump, where you have a reset on the season with Watson injured. And it made sense that we saw the Browns show as well as they did. But there was an immediate letdown on the road at the Saints. Is there going to be an immediate letdown on the road here at Denver? Does the extended time off negate some of that? If you're telling me that the Browns play in this game with the same level of effort and commitment that they did in the Steelers game, 5.5 is a bargain. That is a price that is easily a bet that I would make. I just don't know what the answer is. If the answer is that we see similar defensive buy-in like they showed against the Saints, then this is a pretty easy spot to bet the Broncos at 5.5. Denver right now is playing as confident as any team in the NFL. They have an O-line that is dominant up front, which could certainly negate the pass rush for the Browns. That could go the other way, where this is Bo Nix stepping up to face an elite pass rush, and we've seen the struggles that he has had at other times this season when that's been the case. We've seen how great the Broncos are when they're playing with the lead and front running, relying on the O-line, getting multiple backs switched in. If the Browns defense is a no-show, there's certainly potential for the Broncos offense in these backs to break off big plays and to have a big game. I just don't know what's true or not in this. And maybe this is something that develops over the course of the week. This is a Monday night game. We're a long way away from kickoff. I'm not sure, because I don't know how to handicap and grade what type of effort we are getting out of the Browns at all. If I knew that answer, I could make a very confident bet on this game at this number, which has been adjusted down from 7.5 to 5.5. Without knowing, I have to sit on the sidelines in this one. So that'll do it for the Week 13 preview. In terms of sides and totals that were discussed, Bears at 10, Giants at 3.5 is one you put in your pocket. I'll certainly have an update on that one. Chiefs laying 12 at home. Titans, Washington over 43 was the total we released. LA, Atlanta over 47.5. Pittsburgh, Cincinnati was a pass. Colts, Pats, pass. Jags, Texans, pass. Arizona plus 3.5 is a side that I like. Seahawks, Jets, pass. Laid the Bucks minus 5.5. Laid the Rams minus 3. The Ravens minus 3. And then passed on Sunday night, and am unclear what to do with Monday Night Football. Props for Thursday, DJ Moore receiving yards 52.5 over. Keep an eye out for Neighbors in the first quarter, priced around 10. That's something you have to watch for. And then Jacobs rush attempts for the late game. Those props very much forced by YouTube commentary and peer pressure that came with it. That is putting it very, very lightly. Do with those as you wish. Would say conviction and confidence, as well as bet size in those relative to the others, very slim in comparison. So that is just something that putting out there for Thanksgiving. I know there were comments about it that wanted it. Something to think about for each of those three games. With all of that said, I appreciate everybody for dealing with the inconsistent audio versus video. We'll hopefully be back to normal next week. No show Thursday, no show Friday, as everybody's dealing with Thanksgiving festivities. I hope everybody has an awesome weekend. Enjoy the football. Enjoy the times with family and friends. Enjoy the food. And have a fantastic couple days. I will be back with each and every one of you Sunday afternoon following that Eagles-Ravens game before Sunday Night Football kicks off between the 49ers and Bills. Let's have a great week. We'll chat to you Sunday afternoon.